Hey everybody, and welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, thanks for being here. Coming up soon, we should be having this on YouTube and maybe even Instagram too, which will be pretty cool. We'll be all over the things, so you can join us there. And if you're joining us now, go ahead and start typing in the questions that you have now, comments, whatever else they may be, and we'll answer those questions as we go throughout this broadcast. Are we ready to kick off the podcast improper?
Ready. We ready.
All right, let's go. Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everybody.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hi, everybody.
And we are going to answer some of your cycling and triathlon related questions today that you've submitted. You can do so at trainerroad.com/podcast. Thank you to everybody that submits those questions. We get a ton of them. It's tough to keep up with all of them that we get. And I wish that we could answer every one of them, but we're only so many humans. So, but
we're three.
Yeah, three. This is correct. You can count it. Before we get into that, something that, well, actually, and before you even mention the Facebook beta group, Nate, this is something that I just wanted to touch on. Have you made any bike fit adjustments, even though you don't have your TT bike? We talked about this last week. We went and got TT bike fits because we're working toward, we're trying to be the fastest time trialists we can be, and we're sharing everything that we learn with you guys along that way. I've made some bike adjustments to my road bike to reflect. It's not in my TT position, but get kind of closer. Have you?
Yeah, I made some. So when I took my saddle off, because I brought it down to the fitting, I didn't mark where it was supposed to be. And then I tried moving it like forward and up based on some measurements. But I spent the last week just every workout in the middle stopping, moving a millimeter, because it was perfect before for like at least for power generation on my road bike. Yeah. And I didn't even like do the exact measurements that Dan did. I was just like, I'm going to try it forward and up and forward. Yeah. And I should have just left it the way it was, or done like, gotten a level and been like, this is the exact position. Because for me, millimeters really matter. Oh, yeah. Like I can feel them.
And it's funny you mentioned like that little millimeter by millimeter change. It's so easy to find yourself a year down the road. You'll be like, whoa, I'm 2 inches off, like 3 inches off, because you make that little change and then for some reason it feels better in that moment, but it's probably false attribution. And then we end up just, keep going. My bike fit is evidence of that. It had strayed from what it once was. And I actually made the adjustments to reflect, because we did get road bike fits too. And in terms of the saddle to bottom bracket position, it's very similar to what I have on the TT bike. So I made that change, and oh man, it feels good.
Oh, good.
It feels great. It feels so much better. So one problem that I've had, and I don't think that this solves the constant knee issues that I always battle or anything else, but one problem that I've had is when I'm pedaling in the position that I was, and I wasn't far set back. In fact, I was pretty close to the bottom bracket compared to most folks. But it was really difficult for me to use my glutes and hamstrings as effectively as using my quadriceps. And in this position, it's so much easier to do that. I don't have to be like constantly thinking of it. It's just happening. So pretty awesome stuff.
So how did you move your bike? Because what Dan did is he had a level, which we need a big level here.
We do.
And we need a big straight edge here.
Yes, we do.
The straight edge, because you need the millimeters and like a metric straight edge.
You can get a straight edge level with millimeters.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you're a genius. There it is. So, but we need two of those actually,
yes, we do.
Because you need to be able to do
a square.
Exactly. So how did you do that without those tools?
Yeah. So when I looked at where he was measuring, he measured. So I used a ruler, and then I used a tape measure, and then I counted on the tape measure being straight. I counted on the ruler being straight, and that having the measurements that I needed. So what I needed to do was move my saddle. It was 745 millimeters vertically from the bottom bracket to the point where you sit on the saddle, basically, is what he measured. So I measured that length. And then thereafter, what I had to do was then I moved the saddle forward, because it had to be, I think it was 112 centimeters or 101 centimeters, something like that, millimeters behind the bottom bracket was the front part of the rails of my saddle. So that's where I measured on those reference points.
I just saw Chad's eyes glaze over. Probably a lot of people.
Yeah,
it's hard to talk bike.
A while ago.
And that's the thing. The thing about this is, and I want to get across, is just because we've moved our saddles forward and up or something like that does not mean that that's what you should do.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is I feel good in a relative TT position now.
Okay, here's my pro tip. What I saw Dan do is he measured from the tip of the nose. So, okay, let me step back. Getting your saddle height, you always have to figure out where you measure your, like from the bottom bracket, and you always do it from the bottom bracket to, well, you could do it from the pedal too, if you, whatever.
Pedal's tricky.
Yeah, pedal's tricky.
Best.
Yeah, bottom bracket to, usually it's the center of the saddle.
Yeah, contact points.
Yeah, where your sit bone's anchored.
Assume, yeah.
But where, so it's, I've heard different, right? It depends on where you measure it to get the right accurate measurement. And if you change saddles, that position could change too.
Yeah.
Like you, for example, have the specialized power saddle.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a nose on it. If you have a saddle that has a long nose and your reference point is the front of the saddle, who knows where you're actually placing that saddle in relation to your sit
makes
bones.
perfect sense.
So here's the pro tip. I saw Dan measure it, but I want to actually kind of like lightly scar my saddle to the point where I'm always going to score. Yeah, what I say, scar?
Scar.
It's gonna kind of like a scar.
Kind of same thing.
I'm gonna score it, and it's gonna have a scar, so that I can always measure the exact same point.
Smart.
And then the next thing, if I change saddles, what I saw Dan do is he lined them up to be like, okay, you sit on the power this way, and you sit on this saddle this way. So that means we really have to then, like, this point is going to be like he measured the difference. That was actually from tip of the saddle to my handlebars, but you could just take that into account. So what I'm saying is, if you switch saddles where you sit differently, you'll want to then score it in a different spot so you can measure the same way. Because I've done that where, you know, on my other bikes, I do it. I'm like, as you move it like just a little bit, it totally changes.
It totally
like
does.
like a
Especially
2 or
if
3 millimeters.
It's a big deal. All the back pain I was having, I brought my saddle forward maybe centimeter, 2 centimeters.
helped a lot.
That's it. It hasn't recurred. So.
But don't change it if you're just fine. Because I think people will be.
I think the point is a solid bike fit really helps. That's what we're getting at.
Yeah. All right.
So anyways, exciting stuff that we're getting close to that TT stuff. But Nate, you have a couple things that you wanted to, something you wanted to mention.
Yep. TrainerRoad has a Facebook beta group. It's called TrainerRoad. What is it? Facebook?
I think
TrainerRoad
it's
Beta
Testers.
Testers.
Beta Testers.
It's TrainerRoad Beta Testers. So if you search for that or you look on our page, you can join it. We have to approve you, but we'll approve everybody. And in there are product managers. We go in there, and all the new stuff that we have coming out that's not released to the masses is going to be in there. We have something in there already right now. The new thing what we're talking about will be released in there soon, and you'll get pretty much, if you want early access to our latest stuff. But you are okay if you want to give us feedback. There could be bugs that you wouldn't experience in production. If you want to be a early beta tester, join that group.
Yeah, early beta tester. It's exciting to get early access to stuff, but you have to keep in mind that it's not production yet. So things can happen, and that's just how it goes. So.
Yeah, and it's just, if you have ever used the internet, things in beta aren't always the best. So, but I mean, we try the best to make them the best.
Of course we do. We got
and they will be the best.
we got DEXA scans recently, and the point for that is kind of establishing a baseline as we start our TT training. Nate, you did the opposite, I think, of Chad and I, in the sense that you're in like a record position, aren't you?
You mean I got skinnier?
Yeah. Yeah, like your body fat's low, your lean mass is high.
Yeah, I'm all. So first, a DEXA scan is a body fat scan, and the DEXA is it's a dual X-ray scan. You lay down on this mat. It's the gold standard of on a table actually. It's the gold standard of measuring the body fat. And
body composition.
Body composition. It also measures the weight of your bones and how much lean mass you carry.
Hence body composition.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but if you say body composition, people might not know.
Yeah.
All those words.
I appreciate the explanation.
Thank you, Coach Chad. All day long, people.
Every day.
So we've been doing it over actually 2 years now. We've been doing it a lot, and I started out relatively, I'd call myself skinny fat before. I didn't look
you weren't
as bad, but I was high. And another thing to know about is DEXA scans. Your body fat percentage is much higher than what you would see on like fat calipers.
Usually double is
Yeah,
what we've seen.
Maybe not
a big
quite
jump.
double, but a lot.
We've seen,
It's
if
a
you
lot.
look at the data for all of us, all three of us, it's nearly double in every single case. So
when I was at
you can
24%
expect
body
that.
fat, my calipers were not saying
12.
no.
They
They were
weren't saying
saying
that.
no. I think they were saying like 16 or something.
Okay, gotcha.
But anyways, it's
Substantially higher.
yeah. And if you want to see the difference, because you're not going to see us with our shirts off, but just like no way, just Google online, go DEXA body fat or something, and you'll see people. You'll be like, that guy's ripped, and it'll be at like 15% body fat on DEXA.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, what? And it'll blow your mind because you think that guy is 8%. And they'll even say, I'm 8% calipers, 15%
Yep.
on DEXA.
yeah.
So
So I think that something that all of us, or actually I'll just speak for myself here, coming into the spot where I am, I haven't been training quite as much because of the knee thing. I'm getting that. That's pretty much, I would say, taking care of at this point. I'm doing much better with it, but haven't been training as much. Wintertime, comfort food, holiday food, everything
We're
else.
kind of where we should be. Nate's quite a bit ahead of the game right now.
Yeah, Nate's far ahead. So
Just try to get in my brain.
yeah, because I'm at 13.7 right now.
Nate's
or
shooting for a
13.6.
March peak.
Yeah. He's gonna collapse after that. But 13.6 is where I'm at right now, and I think the best I've been with DEXA is 11% with that. So
Yep.
I can expect to tip down in race season to get all the way down there. That's expected for me to drop down to that point. But it's going to be interesting to see how that changes, if it changes, and at what rate it changes with TT training, because I've never done sustained TT training versus I've always done more stochastic stuff where it's like, on off. So and those workouts are big burners in terms of the ones where you're doing these long sustained intervals.
Huge, which is why Nate's looking the way Nate's looking. He's doing a ton of work. Well, he's also eating a ton of quality carbohydrate, and everything's trending positively.
So before we talk about me, Jonathan, you were at 13.7% DEXA, and fat calipers, body, actually, are they called fat calipers? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
6.2. I'm all messed up now.
Yeah,
I'm just looking to Chad.
Sorry,
Am I
broke
saying
your
these words
rhythm.
right?
In his head.
6.2.
Yep.
So he's at 6.2, and then his DEXA is 13.7. Just to show you how crazy that is.
So like if you have heard of traditional body fat measurements, that's usually, you can consider those to be caliper test results. So
Subcutaneous fat only.
Yep.
Yes.
And then the DEXA does intermuscular, which is like if you're a ribeye or sirloin, and visceral fat.
And as endurance athletes, that's a very real concern. I mean, it's a desirable thing.
To be sirloin, right? Not ribeye.
No, to have some intramuscular triglyceride stores.
Really?
That's a desirable. It's a usable fuel source.
that makes sense.
And then
Fast action.
visceral fat, which is it's a really thick yellow fat that goes around your organs, and that's the kind of fat that kills you.
Yeah, it's not helpful to anybody.
Yeah,
Not good
you don't want it. That's when you see older men get a lot when they have the big belly, and it's like rock hard. You touch it, and you're like, wow, that is hard.
Hugely unhealthy.
Yep.
Yeah, not good.
Chad, you want to talk about yours?
Not much to say. I'm exactly where I was at this time last year. So last January, my body fat DEXA, and that's all I've done. So I don't have all the information these guys have, is back up to 17%. And the Tanita scale bears everything out just as it would. I'm right about 11, a little over 11. So it's all right back to where I was. The one thing that's been surprisingly encouraging is that I'm fat, and it isn't due to the fact that I'm putting on muscle in the gym, because taking off muscle is a lot harder than taking off fat. And I like lifting. So I don't like the idea that I'm going to bulk up to the point where I have to get new clothes, new kit, all that stuff, and that I'm going to be a bigger athlete. I do like the idea that I've gotten stronger, haven't added mass. All my weight gain is fat, which means I can reverse it pretty easily.
That's great. And so before, when you were 17%, your fat calipers were 10%.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So, and actually, too, you can see us. If you go to, if you're on Facebook, you can watch us live. And you're probably already doing that because you're watching us live. But we are also putting these on YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you want to see how fat we are.
Point of reference. So
point of reference.
because that's the point of it, right?
You look at Chad's guns right there. He doesn't look like 17%. 10% looks good.
Something I want to get across, too, is that this reinforces, I know that we're really hard on ourselves as cyclists and triathletes, especially because we always talk about power to weight. Don't get so hard on yourself if you have crept up in weight or crept up in body fat over the winter.
It's part of the cycle.
And I see a lot of people that are really hard on themselves for that, and I think it's detrimental. Like, don't get me wrong.
Keep it reined in. We're not saying go crazy, but if you bump up a few percentage, add 3 or 4 pounds of fat, it is not the end of the world. And frankly, it's kind of a healthy way to go. Give yourself some downtime. Let yourself have some slack.
Yeah. It's a thing that I would recommend for a lot of folks. So, Nate,
let's talk about me, guys.
Let's do it.
Okay, so now I am at 12.8%.
Lowest you've been.
Lowest I've been. Jonathan, what were you at?
Now? 13.7.
Woo! That's the first time I've ever been the skinniest guy on the podcast, ever. In the last 2 years we've done that. So I'm super happy about that.
Big day for you, Nathan.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
it's good. It's awesome.
It is. So there's two things. First, I want to go over my numbers, and I want to say something higher level, and then what I did. I'm 187 pounds. I'm 6'6", and I'm sorry for the people. Like, we mention some of these things over and over because we get actually a lot of new listeners.
Yeah.
And it gives people context that if If I say 187 pounds and I don't say I'm tall, so
Yeah.
I know it's a big joke, but 12.8. I lost between the last 4 months. I lost 2 pounds of fat and gained 3 1/3 pounds or 3 1/4 pounds of muscle. And that's a really cool thing about the DEXA scan is that sometimes you get a small move in body weight.
Yeah.
But if you add muscle and lose fat, your whole life's better.
I look at it like a scale, and then you're measuring coins. Like if you were to like throw a bunch of coins onto a scale, and all of them are silver dollars, but then you did the same weight in pennies. You know what I mean? Like it's
well, in this case, I mean, Nate would have gained a pound. That could be pretty discouraging. But he knows he actually lost 2 pounds of fat, gained 3 pounds plus of muscle.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then there was another time too, earlier on when I was fatter, I lost 8 pounds of fat and gained 4 pounds of muscle, which is in terms of like body composition, that's amazing. But if I did all that work and I only lost 4 pounds, I could get in my head.
Can I throw a disclaimer on that really quick? When you say fatter, what we're talking about is relative.
It's all relative.
Because I can see a lot of people like getting upset when they hear that.
None of us consider ourselves fat. None
Oh yeah.
So it's relative.
I was heavier
when he had more fat body fat.
You're carrying more body fat, so that's all we need.
Yeah. And also if men to women, different scales too. Women usually carry more body fat, and that may not even be visibly apparent. It may not even reflect itself in terms of performance. It's just the way that we're made. And lower body fat is not necessarily a good thing, especially when you're getting into like to a point, you know, it can be bad.
Then you actually do less. And I think I've gained a little bit more muscle mass, and actually my power and my power to weight have gone up.
There we go.
I think I've talked about this before, but I'm going to still try to gain a little bit more weight leading up to a 40K TT since it's flat and it's not going to matter. Get more power. Over the last 2 years, I've lost 22.5 pounds of fat and I've gained 10 pounds of muscle. Again, DEXA's cool. And in Reno, too, to do the DEXA, we don't even have to have a doctor's note. We can just schedule it and do it, and it costs $50. And then I've gained 93 watts on my FTP over 2 years. And that's with the broken collarbone, and I had that surgery that knocked me out for a while.
It's awesome.
So I went from 252 to 345. So I just want to say training works.
Yeah, no, those are some encouraging statistics right there.
TrainerRoad works.
Yeah, it does.
Proof in the pudding right there.
Proper diet works.
Yeah, so another thing recently that I've changed, and you guys have seen me this because I just kind of show you all my food all the time.
Very regularly. Yeah.
Long-time podcast listeners, Popeye listeners, will know that before I'd had some Popeyes, and that was more of a joke. I really haven't had Popeyes since the last time we mentioned it.
You eat clean.
7 or 8 months ago. Really, my whole diet, I read that Endurance Diet by Matt Fitzgerald, changed my life. I'm totally carb-centric, totally plant, veggie and fruit is the basis for all of my meals, then kind of whole grain stuff, try to stay away from all processed grain. I still do like cheat stuff once in a while. It was someone's birthday yesterday, had a little bit of a donut, but my lunches will be a big sweet potato with beans on it and a huge salad. And then maybe if I'm still hungry, some bell peppers and carrots. So when I say high carb, like this is what
carbs usually are equivalent. Like everyone just thinks pasta.
Yeah, well,
rice.
And I'm doing whole wheat pasta with some tomato sauce on it, but the carbs have a really bad name, right?
Yeah.
And there's a difference between me getting all these carbs through Coca-Cola and eating the donuts and French fries, than eating sweet potatoes, carrots, green beans, blueberries, beets, raspberries, tomatoes. Like all those things have a lot of carbs in it.
All different qualities of carbohydrate, and you've shifted your balance from low quality to high quality all at once.
For those, I have not been trying. So listening back to, I counted all my calories, like every single thing, and you guys saw me. I weighed it. I bring weights to restaurants and do it. Yeah. And really, the best I felt and the easiest has just been eating mostly fruits and vegetables as my main meal source. I'm not hungry. I'm actually the opposite. Is I'll have big workouts that come up, and I'll just be stuffing myself. I'm like, I can't eat any more beans and trying to get it in. Just because my workouts, I then perform a lot better too. So not only is my body composition better and I'm not hungry, but I'm performing better too at the same time. It sounds, it's not very sexy, right?
Yeah, right. Like just
eat lots of vegetables.
Yeah.
Like in the morning I have Ezekiel cereal, which is like this sprouted grain cereal. With low-fat milk and berries, and then after that, I'll have some carrots or some green beans that are just raw. I'll have that big lunch I talked about. It's really simple. Yeah, it's simple stuff. And the other thing I've noticed is if you do this for a while, I'll like steal a bite of my son's McDonald's hamburger and it tastes disgusting.
Yeah.
I used to love McDonald's, but now that stuff that's really like, that is like, last time I had Popeyes, it was disgusting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Probably everyone else knew that but me. But anyways, I just want to say that part of it's motivational and part of it's just, it sounds so simple. Just eat lots of fruits and vegetables. You do great on the bike. It improves body composition. And it's real basic stuff, right? But
yeah, no, welcome to the party, Nate.
Chad's been waiting for you the whole time. Door open.
When's that 40K TT?
March 26th. Or May 26th.
Is it May 26th?
That's what we're
Because I was peaking for March.
Yeah, we know. We can sell.
Shoot.
Our last thing I want to cover before we get into the questions is a quick plug on. So Nick Canwetz, one of our employees here, put together with plenty of research here with the team at TrainerRoad, but put together an awesome blog post on. I've never done my full race distance, but will I be ready for my event? And the reason I'm saying this is because, man, we get this question quite a lot, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We even have a question that I think alludes to this loosely in today's podcast that we'll go over. So please refer to that blog post and our stance on that. Well, you can go and read it and figure it out.
And I have a question for you guys. Leadville.
Yeah.
Is anyone going to do a 9, 10, or maybe 8 for you hour mountain bike?
Mountain bike ride, yeah.
No,
right?
It's not the goal.
It's not necessary.
I've never ridden a bike that long at all.
I have. Should I tell you guys about it? Just joking.
Chad and I haven't. But we're not going to do that ahead of time.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Not even.
Anyways, read the blog post. blog.trainerroad.com.
That's where it is. And then we're going to start off with a submission. It's not necessarily a question, but I feel like this is relatable for lots of folks.
It's a good lesson.
Yeah, for sure. It comes from John. He says, "Gents, I really appreciate what you're doing with the podcast and was happy to pay a mere $100 for my annual TR subscription, compared to my buddy who pays 12 times for that for a coach that only uses heart rate."
Ouch.
So, ouch. Yeah, burn to your buddy. So anyways, he says that he's also getting a lot faster now than his buddy too. So double burn. Anyways, 5 stars given for 5 stars earned. Yeah, I know, right?
He's like, hey, you're going out of my heart rate zone, buddy. Come back here.
Also riding out of his zone, period. He's riding away from him, right? He says, you guys share a lot of pro tips, so I thought I would share my decidedly noob story for all those not-so-pros out there and resulting amateur hour tip. I think Nate will appreciate my neuroses throughout this experience.
Yes.
He says, I started Sweet Spot Base 2, and for those that don't know, that's our Sweet Spot Base plan. That's the first phase of your training if you're going from wherever you are to peak fitness. He says, I started it 5 weeks ago and could not finish an FTP test. He says, it absolutely crushed me. I placed what I thought was appropriate, but I just crashed and burned in the worst way early on in the second interval.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. Go to TrainerRoad Beta Testers Facebook page if you hate the 8-minute, 20-minute test. Just telling you.
Oh, boy, we're about to get a flood right there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he says, and also his experience is not abnormal in this case. To see people, have an issue their first time doing an FTP test, that happens.
It's hard to pace any duration effort.
Yep, you learn to work through it. So. Yep. He says, strangely, I did get in one weekend mountain bike ride. So actually, I'm going to paraphrase a bit. He says he stuck with all the workouts. They were extremely hard. He couldn't finish a lot of them. Then he says, strangely, I did get out on one weekend mountain bike ride on my local an hour 15-ish loop with 2,000 feet of climbing and gnarly tech, and I finished within 2 minutes of my PR. So it shows that his fitness is good, but he's being hard on himself because he couldn't finish the workouts. He says, but then I still couldn't complete those workouts. So I'm going to summarize. He went through a whole bunch of different things. He thought, man, maybe I'm not eating enough. Maybe I'm not eating the right stuff. Maybe I'm not sleeping enough. Maybe I'm just not supposed to be fast, right? He went through every question. And then he came down to the point where he was like, wait a second, maybe it's an equipment issue. So he looked at his brake and his brake was rubbing. But then he moved that brake and it was still really hard to finish his workouts and he couldn't do it. He ended up looking at the bike and the skewer. He said the skewer was locked into the trainer just fine, but that skewer, once he started to look at it, was actually askew with his bike because he just kept this bike on the trainer. And I've actually seen that before. Mm-hmm. It makes it terribly hard to ride, and it adds a ton of drag, and it can be a total bummer. So if you are finding yourself in this situation, this is what he says. He says, unpro tip of the week, don't be like me. Take the bike off the trainer now and then, give it a quick inspection, put it back together, and train on. Not doing so can wreck a training block, your confidence, and probably your equipment too. So, good tip.
I have an embarrassing story too on that.
Oh, yeah? Do tell.
So I've been using the CYCLIST hammer now for 6-8 months.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I have a 9-speed cassette on it, on
Really?
my 11-speed bike.
It still functions,
It
right?
still functions, yeah. I was just like, why can't I click on, it feels like I'm missing a gear. I'm missing 2 gears.
There we are.
And I went down there and I counted them like 4 times in a row. So I'm
Yeah.
like, you can't be this
can't be.
stupid. You can't be this stupid.
So
But
you
yeah.
need an 11-speed cassette on there.
Yeah, and it's because our test team bikes are all 9-speed because they're less expensive
Yep.
to buy.
Yep.
And they had put a 9-speed cassette on that for some kind of testing.
That
And then it
makes
got back
sense.
on, they put it back in my office and it's
Yep.
a 9-speed now.
So something to know with that, though, you can get away. I'm sure that you can still get away with even shifting some gears without
No.
having jumping.
They're, like 8 of them are good.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of people think it can't work. And sure, it's best to use 11 with 11, but you'd be surprised at what you can get away with. And
Yeah.
we also get a question somewhat regularly when people talk about Eagle, because it's 12 speed. And if they can use that, the spacing on Eagle with 12 speeds is the same as the spacing on 11 speeds.
Okay,
It
so
just has one cog that's dished in toward that wheel a little more. So
I used Eagle on that 9-speed cassette.
there we are.
And I could find a gear that worked, and I used erg mode.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, helpful stuff. Let's go into Andrew's question. He says, what are the respective ages of Nate Pearson, Chad Timmerman, and Jonathan? Let's go over those first, I guess, before we get into anything else.
Next Wednesday, I'll be 46.
Nice.
About 2 weeks from now, I'll be 36.
And I am 30 and a half. So
30 and a half.
30 and a half. Yeah, important to
So
count those
10
out.
years difference between Chad and I, and then 6 between us.
Yes,
5 and
exactly
a half.
right. He says, on a more serious note, though, and we shared those because hopefully this gives people some point of reference for the conversation we'll have after this. So he says, on a more serious note, what are the effects of age on FTP? At 53, I'm still going up. What can older athletes reasonably expect?
So as aging athletes, we're up against really 3 primary things that I'll discuss. First is the decline in VO2 max. Whether or not that takes place on the intake of oxygen or the uptake at the muscle is hotly debated, and it doesn't really matter. The fact is it declines. The upside to all of the things I'm about to point out is that we have some control over how rapidly it declines. Secondly, we typically get fatter, whether that's due to inactivity, poor eating, a shift in the type of workouts we do, less working out, etc. Aging athletes typically add body fat. And then there's a decline in muscle mass. So it's the same thing. And this just happens as a result of age, but also misuse or disuse. You know, if you don't use it, you do actually lose it. Muscles do atrophy if they're not utilized.
Getting old sounds great.
Yeah, but these are all things, and see, these are all things that happen to a sedentary person or, you know, a person who's cutting back on their training. Excuse me. But in any case, well within our control. The decline in VO2 max, the decline in max heart rate, which is arguable whether that even happens to a measurable degree. In some athletes, it doesn't. It sticks. But the decline in VO2 max can be controlled with high-intensity work and not a ton of it. Obviously, body fat, that's basically dietary and tied to your workload. And then muscle mass. Hit the gym, especially as an aging athlete. This is why it's so important for masters, women, for people with any sort of bone deficiency possibilities, osteopenia, osteoporosis. These are things that absolutely affect cyclists, and one way to mitigate those effects is to weight train, strength train.
I've always heard that the VO2 max starts to decline at 35.
Yeah, I've seen that number kicked around, 35, 45. It gets noticeable. But even when it gets noticeable, when you see those bigger declines, it's usually tied to the fact that athletes become less active or they start ditching intensity.
You know, something go ahead.
It's typically estimated at about a 1% decline per year.
I find it very interesting that in cyclocross, other than the pros, oftentimes the fastest category are the 40-year-olds, the 40 to 44s around there.
Yeah, and you can expect.
And that's a very VO2 intensive type of effort. You know what I mean?
Yep. And then, you know, as VO2 max maybe declines, maybe you're increasing your FTP as a percentage of it. So performance doesn't necessarily have to tank like you think it's going to.
And that's another part of it is that he said, Andrew says at 53, I'm still going up.
Yeah.
I think, like, how many people do we know who we think, like, personally, you've hit your max potential, like physically?
Right?
Do I know anyone?
No. Like,
anyone?
That's the thing. Like, I mean, first of all, it'd be really hard to measure that, but I think that we're very good at placing a mental limitation on ourselves with that. But in terms of physical limitations, that's something else. There are so many athletes that are extremely fast in their 50s and only going up. I think like Southern California, for example, I mean, it has a lot of racers, but there are a lot of really fast masters racers down there, and then also in the NorCal scene too. But in the mountain bike side of things and cross, Like Victor Sheldon, for example, he's incredibly fast, and he's, I believe, in the 50-year-old age group now, and I would not be surprised if he's only getting faster every year. I mean, it's common to see.
I can't tell you how many, over the last just week, personal conversations I've had with users where I'll just tell you, we're playing with a new kind of FTP test, and that's in that TrainerRoad beta group and on my Strava that you can follow. But inside of there, a bunch of people, they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. And they report back, they're like, I did it, and it was hard. And I'm like, yes.
It feels good.
Like they're like, I did VO2 max intervals, and it was really hard. And I'm like, I'm typing back, it's supposed to be hard. Like, it does. But so much of their life, they never, or at least their history with TrainerRoad, they had worked out at a lower FTP and never pushed themselves because they were scared. They're like, no way could I be that high.
Yeah.
No way could I be 10 watts higher. No way could I be 15 watts higher. And then they try it, and then it works.
At hard work, I mean, there are certain limitations for sure, but hard work, as long as it's in the confines of proper structure and everything else, it makes you faster. And I think that that seems very commonplace and very understandable. But I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not going to get any faster now because I'm older. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the case.
So the other point is, in all of the racing that we do in triathlon, it's age group bucket, right?
Yeah.
So as long as your guys aren't going the testosterone, and this is for male or hormone replacement kind of stuff, although I don't even know for women if hormone replacement is illegal because I don't really know. I mean, I know for men it is, but
because then that's a tricky area.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast topic.
Yeah.
But so you maybe not hit your potential in your 50s, but you're going against other 50-year-olds. So I wouldn't worry about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, and just know too that you can always improve. And just because you can be faster at 60 than you were at 50, absolutely. You can be faster at 50 than you were at 30.
Totally.
Especially as you get older, handling skills and just like tactics, because usually you're a lot smarter, right?
Yeah,
Chad?
totally.
Yeah.
Living proof.
Yeah. Very smart.
And I think another thing with that too is available time that you may have. Maybe the kids are older, more independent. You don't have to rely on that. Maybe your career is in a spot that's a little bit more sustainable and allows you more flexibility.
A lot of athletes get smarter with their training too. They have less and less time to train, so they have to do it more intelligently. Yeah. And if you get to a point where you're just not afraid to suffer and you can make the most out of that limited time, you'll be surprised.
I'm just reading a book now about grit, and they say as you get older, you get grittier, right?
Yeah.
It's totally. You can do things longer that are uncomfortable.
Some may call it stubborn.
I see old timers, quote unquote, old timers come off the bench. 45-year-old racers who have maybe had a 6-month training hiatus, and they get out there and they duke it out. And it's inexplicable. You see them hang on to something that just defies logic. They shouldn't be able to do it, but they do it primarily out of tenacity. They're just tough.
I wish I had, at 35, my grit is so much more than I had at 20.
Yeah.
If I could take the discipline that I have in my life and everything that I do
apply it back
at
then.
20, when I had all the even more energy and like it would be amazing.
Yeah. I think we all think that though.
Right? Yeah.
Wisdom grows.
Well, just
a little slow for us sometimes.
Well, right now, too, so what I want to think about then is what will my 45-year-old self say about my 35-year-old self, right?
Yep, look ahead with it.
And then all the 20-year-olds listening, think about what we're saying right now and try to apply that to your life about being grittier and sticking with things and stuff like that.
Like I see a lot of younger athletes because they have the luxury of time and they don't have as many responsibilities that require them. I see a lot of them not being efficient with their training, and a lot of pro athletes even that I see that are just they spend the whole day just noodling around on the bike rather than being really structured. And man, there's so much to be gained if you are more structured with it. So.
I'm actually looking at one of them right now. There's a pro in our right here who we put he's kind of listening behind us, so he doesn't know what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah.
But he was trying to hire FTP and he complained about the workouts are too hard.
Yeah.
And then he actually went through them and did all the workouts. And he wins pro enduros. He's looking at me now.
Super fast.
Yep. And he's a young guy, but get that grit, Bryce. You can do it. You'll be even better.
Let's go into David's question. He says, love the podcast. I enjoy putting the YouTube video up on my screen at work and listening and watching. Great work. You and plenty of folks, David. There are a lot of people that I think do that very same thing. It's easy to kind of put YouTube in the backgrounds and have spreadsheets on top and just kind of yeah, exactly.
Hopefully not our employees.
Yeah. So he says, my question, I'm not the best at sprinting, but I love crits. This isn't to say that you need to be a Caleb Ewan to win crits, but it helps to be able to sprint in criteriums. Of course, yeah. He says, with that said, I've had luck breaking away and staying off the front for a good amount of time in races before. Kind of more Nate's strategy. You've mentioned that you'd rather do that one 10 times to 1 to having to go into a sprint, right?
Yep.
He says, now I'm stuck between picking a specialty phase. So, and for those that don't know, we break our training down into 3 phases. There's the base phase, the build phase, and the specialty phase. The final one is where things get really specific. So instead of just, something that's more general, we actually have a criterium specific training plan in that part, as well as things like time trials and stuff. He says, I'm thinking of picking the crit plan, but would it be terrible to pick a TT plan to help increase my sustainable power that would keep me off the front of a crit? I'm a 170-pound rider with an FTP of about 270. So that puts him at around 3.5 watts per kilogram. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so, David, I understand your dilemma, but I'm of the opinion that you should, when at all possible, round out your arsenal. You don't want your limitations to basically restrict your tactics. So if this is your plan to race like this all the time, you become a very predictable rider. It also kind of gets a little uninteresting for you. You know what your one playable tactic is, and you're reliant upon it. If it doesn't shake out, then what else are you going to do? You're not going to be in the hunt if it comes down to any sort of sprint.
One thing really quick on that, if I could. Granted, if you're going into like a national championship, for example, where like one race really matters, you'll want to rely on your strengths as much as possible.
Yeah, but as a road racer, a mass start road racer, you have to have a wide array of skills. I mean, you simply do, and capabilities. So it's not to say you have to develop the best sprint you can, and you're going to siphon off some of your energy that would be dedicated to muscle endurance to improving your sprint. But I would still address your sprint. Whether or not you want to go crit plan versus TT plan, it's still kind of up to you. We can all weigh in on that, but I'd say stick with the crit plan. Again, so that you can be a more well-rounded rider. If you decide to go the TT route, you can weave in sprint work quite easily, even within a muscle endurance workout. Just sprinkle in a couple 5 to 6, 8 to 10 second efforts, and boom, you've got a sprint workout part and parcel.
Yeah, David, I like your strategy, but the thing about the TT plan is you can't just in a crit be like, okay, guys, I'm going to be at threshold for the next 40 minutes. Don't catch up.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's all you have to like an explosive effort to get off, establish the break. That's very high, and usually a VO2 max effort, and then settle into it. And when
you're settling in at threshold. Like it's
depending on how long it is, right?
Yeah,
like that's my other point is it could be a 10-minute break.
So
right?
then you're gonna have to be above threshold.
It's usually not a hour-long break, or like a 40-minute break. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think criterium riders are have to be amongst the most versatile riders out there.
Yes.
It's a short, hard race. It's kind of like a cross racer. You have to be able to do a lot of things, and you have to be able to do them all well.
Something I've found too. So let's say that you build up this one-trick pony kind of level, right? Where you're this guy that just breaks off the front, and you have enough sustained power to actually stay away. That trick will get memorized the next week.
Yeah, those tactics will start working against you.
And then what happens is you get somebody else that comes with you because they're waiting for you to do that. And then what happens is it's not a steady pull anymore. Now you're actually taking polls with somebody and you're working together.
Well, your predictability becomes everybody else's benefit. Everybody knows exactly what you're going to do or when you do something, how that's going to play out, and they can work off of that.
And it changes the nature of the work that you're doing in that breakaway too.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's not sustained.
You may be sustained and consistent, but once you get another person with you, you're going to be
2 or 3 more riders taking hard pulls and you're clinging.
Yeah. So it could put you into a situation where you basically, if you're just hoping that you can be like the solo breakaway guy, you're also banking on everybody else not getting used to that. And I know that's like one of the most helpful things for criterium racing is knowing what your competition is going to do. Because if you know that, you can even get by with a little less fitness, perhaps being in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Like you have more wiggle room if you know what people are going to do. I've
told this story maybe a year and a half ago, but I'm going to tell it again.
Okay.
So back in 2009 or something, when I was doing a lot of crit racing in Reno, and it was a B race, and there was a series of crits, and we have them all the time here in Reno, and it's awesome. And then some of those would be points races, right, for a big overall championship. And what I would do is I would attack, go on a breakaway, and on the non-point races, I would give up ahead of time and get sucked up. So I may get sucked up 4 times in a row.
Everyone would think this guy.
There goes Nate again. And I don't know if anyone thought that, but in my head, this is the thing that I'm thinking that I'm doing. And then on the one that was the point race, I'm like, I'm not going to give up this time. I'm going to get out so no one chases me, and I'm just going to go. And I lap the field.
Oh, yeah.
That's a longer-term strategy, and it was effective, and it's
clever because anytime somebody goes up the road, what do? I mean, when I see somebody go up the road, I instantly weigh, will that stick? Will that guy drop back? You know, I'm always thinking. What is it?
Tommy Voeckler?
Voeckler.
Yeah. Armstrong always like yells at him because he always does these attacks and puts his tongue out and then gets sucked in like a minute later.
Yeah.
The Peloton doesn't care
until he doesn't. Though.
Until he doesn't, and he did that, and that's why he had the yellow jersey for quite a while, and he's had some. And that's just the thing.
Maybe he's just roping us in now.
Exactly right. So much of it is poker. Like I think that when you're especially a criterium because it's so concentrated and it's a shorter race that happens on short loops. So in one respect, it kind of weeds out the variables of the course because everybody knows it. It's the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. So it's just, and that's why I absolutely love criterium racing is because it is that chess match.
Riding on that same point with Thomas Voeckler, he tried things until they worked. I mean, he learned, he basically explored capabilities and then at some point learned, wait, I can do that also. Mm-hmm. So in David's case, where he never to sprint, what if he's actually got a really good sprint to develop? What if he can add that arrow to his quiver? I mean, he'll never know unless
it doesn't take much, I feel, to refine what you've got for your sprint, and that little refinement can actually go a long ways. Whereas some people I see that say, oh, no, I'm a natural sprinter, but they don't work on it a whole lot because they just rely on it as being like a natural strength. I really do think that working on your sprint and familiarizing yourself with it and where you're going to sprint on that course, everything else can really pay off more than just relying on, oh, I'm just naturally gifted as a sprinter.
Yeah. Pete Morris, who pro road racer, now a product manager for TrainerRoad, he always said when we were first races, when we were younger, I'm a sprinter. And then he found out, you know what, I'm not a sprinter.
Yeah, he got into the big leagues, and he found out that there are people that are extremely specialized. And he changed his tactic. And he was then, found a spot where he could race
and he's still an effective bike racer, but he didn't pigeonhole himself.
Very effective.
And has learned that.
Yeah. I'm looking at the mid-volume criterium plan right now, and I think for breakaways and stuff, this is the plan. Just go with this one because even on the weekends, you're getting some attacks with then high, like just below threshold sustainability with more attacks, and you're getting short efforts that are 110 to 112% FTP for 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. That sounds like an establishing the break right there, right?
Yeah, again, it's that versatility I was talking about. So the workouts do account for the fact that you have to be able to do a lot of different things.
And then you're also getting some 12-minute and up 15-minute sweet spot intervals. Yeah, that will help on that longer stuff. So I would just go with the crit plan, not the 40K TT.
Yeah, one thing I would recommend too when you're dealing with, I call them race start intervals, those ones that have a surge, and then after that you stay at threshold or right around there, something like that for an extended period of time. I would recommend if you're doing that too to really treat that in your mind, like don't get out of the saddle and thrash your bike and harm it on the trainer, but treat that in your mind like I am braking.
Yep.
Like I am getting away. So with those really short, like 15-second surges, you don't necessarily have to match, like don't limit yourself with that power target if you feel like it doesn't replicate what you would do if you're really trying to brake.
Yeah, a lot of the workouts in the specialty plans especially are geared toward helping you discover things, not just improving your conditioning, but also letting you test the water, see what works, what maybe is a little too much, what maybe could be done a little better.
The Saturday plans too. They are
Saturday workouts.
Saturday workouts. Sorry, in the crit plan on mid volume. I'm looking at. I really love these types of workouts. You go at 125% for just like 25 seconds, and then you go down to 88% for 15 or 30 seconds, and you go up and down.
Yes.
And then the blocks change. That is
pulling in a pace line.
Pulling up, especially in a breakaway, right?
Totally.
So if he does a breakaway,
criterium in and out of corners.
Yeah, either one like that. But if you get in it, to Jonathan's point earlier, if someone else comes with you, you want to be good at doing those pulls so that when you do get to the finish line and it's a 2-up sprint, you're not totally thrashed like the other person is.
If you're marshaling the front of a pack too, and you're kind of like that guy that's sitting up there waiting for the right move, and you're your third wheel or something like that in that pack, you have a little bit of shelter, you're still going to be surging constantly when people are doing these little breaks.
If you're away in a break, you're working the whole time. It's just a question of how hard.
And if you're in the front and you're not, in just the group and you're trying to keep an eye on everybody attacking to recognize those efforts, it's not a steady effort. You're constantly surging within that too. So it's a killer plan. And you know what the fun part is? I've mentioned this plenty of times before, but when you develop that kind of fitness from a criterium plan, you are a thorn in every single person's side on a group ride thereafter.
You do a lot.
When it's like a hammer
damage.
fest. Don't be the guy that like ruins a peaceful group ride. But when it's like a hammer fest, everyone will just be like, again?
So much more fun.
He's going again? Like, and it'll drive people nuts. So.
Yeah, actually, you're right. So if you just want to like, if you weren't racing you want to just to be like drop ride fit, I would do the criterium plan for, I'd build up to it. And then in the summer when all those rides are happening, do that.
Yep. Yeah. And even if like you're not a road racer and you're a cross racer, it'd be cool to dip the toe into the criterium plan because it's really
There's
similar.
a lot of similarities there, yeah.
So
in the plans and the actual race demands.
Yeah, dip your toe into that in the off season if you want for some fun, and then get back into things with cross later on. So.
Yeah, I find criterium racers make very good cross racers, and vice versa.
Yep. Mike says, what are your views on incorporating, speaking of group rides, Nate, solo and group rides outside the TrainerRoad program? Say you're using a 3-day-a-week TrainerRoad plan. So those usually coincide with like our low volume plans. They're usually 3 to 4 rides a week that you would have on that. And we have low, mid, and high volume of every plan that we have to fit whatever type of stress you can maintain. But we do this pretty regularly. I mean, all of us do it regularly.
Yeah.
This weekend I went out for the drop ride, which ended up being very sad because I got a flat tire and I had to roll it like 2 miles an hour because I didn't have the right tube. But incorporating these rides and putting them into your training plan, how would you say is the best way to go about having a group ride that you have on the weekend? How would you fit that into the plan, Chad? What adjustments would you make?
Just about always just swap it for your Saturday workout. I mean, the Saturday workout's a longer workout in all cases. And it's usually one of the more varied workouts too. And oftentimes it might be a race simulation workout, in which case drop ride, which is very racy, is a super good fit.
The other thing you could do, if you're on the low volume and you can take more volume because you're eating all these fruits and vegetables. Just kidding. But for me, it's priorities. I really want to do, I feel like the weekend workouts and the plans really like push me to the next level. So if I was doing a low volume one and there was a group ride, I would make sure that you can't say which days on, but I would do the Saturday TrainerRoad workout, and then Sunday I would do the group ride and see if I could take that little bit extra stress, because you might not fall exactly in 283 TSS. Maybe you can take a little bit more, but I wouldn't go drop ride and then TrainerRoad ride. Yeah. I mean, you could,
in the
but
same day?
No. Oh. Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. I just priorities, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But if it's a great, fun drop ride, do it on Saturday. But then the next ride is going to be a little bit harder on TrainerRoad, right? Because you're more tired and fatigued.
Also, another option, let's say that you're doing a low volume plan. So you have 3 to 4 structured interval workouts a week. If there is a situation you feel like you can handle plenty of stress, that's an important assumption. Like you can handle more. Maybe you're just stuck with time that you have, right?
Yeah.
But if there's any way that you can fit in your three workouts that you have scheduled that week, and then also do the drop ride, like for example, let's just say Friday evening, you can actually fit in one of those workouts. You could do that as well. What I'm getting at is you don't necessarily have to replace a structured workout with that weekend ride if you can, number one, afford the stress and recover appropriately from it, and then number 2, afford the time. That would be like a great setup if you're doing 3 to 4 structured workouts and then you have that hammer fest on the Saturday.
With anything, it's a try and see sort of approach. You can't just do it and accept that it's going to work. You do it and see how it goes.
And it goes also, it's important to say, I think that all of us feel the same way with this, is that while we feel that you put your money, the deposits go into the bank when you're doing those structured workouts, and it's important to do that. And if you skip that, your balance does go lower. We also recognize the absolute importance and the desire to go outside, because that's the whole point of this thing, is to be training so that you can race effectively, or be in that group ride like you want to ride, whatever else it is. So we get that. I think sometimes people think we just train inside all day. Every day.
There's always a balance to be struck.
Yep, absolutely. And you learn things racing with a group that really complement the fitness that you're building. And if you have that strategy that you can add to that.
And if you're going to race mass start, you have to spend time training mass start. I mean,
you can't just be groups. Like 4 years of TrainerRoad and then come outside and be like, I'm going to do well.
Not in a big group. I mean, that's some sketchy business. You'll be expending a lot of energy riding probably poorly and cautiously.
Proper strategy and experience activates all the fitness that you've built. Right?
Now, this is a little bit of a tangent, but for the time trial, I'm actually the opposite, because I find I can't do really great TT workouts outside.
No, that's why I said mass start, because with time trialing, you can get away with doing basically all your training indoors.
And triathlons.
Totally.
And then I'm just going to do like equipment checks. And the key thing I just have to do is make sure that whatever position I am on my TT bike inside, my head is at the same angle, like looking at my
super important.
my iPad.
So that's a great way to do it, is to basically look at where the line of sight is. And if you it's because it can be really hard to find where that line of sight is. Even if there's horizontal lines in our field of view, it can mess things up in relation. But something really easy that you could do is have somebody take a picture of you when you're riding outside, and then see where your head angle is at when you're riding outside. And then when you get inside, try to replicate that, look where your eyes are, and then put your screen there. It can really help.
And then I'll do
small thing,
shorter races that aren't that important to like make sure all the equipment's set up and I can do, pacing, that kind of thing.
And we've talked about it before. Wear your helmet every once in a while. If you're going to do all your work indoors, as uncomfortable and hot as it may be, put your helmet on. Make sure that the head position you think you're going to maintain works with your helmet, because I've been bitten by that. It doesn't always.
It's more weight, right?
Totally.
More weight for one thing, and depending on the shape of the helmet, you may not be able to get your head in the position that you've been training in.
Yeah, so this isn't necessarily applicable to just road riding, right? If you're not using a TT helmet, but that TT position in that helmet, if you have a long stinger on there, but you've been training to a position where you're just still looking down the whole time, maybe that long stinger helmet worked before, but now you've built up this position where your head's down and that stinger's just poking up into the wind, causing drag. So yeah, you do want to take that into consideration.
Just an equipment check like anything else. Just make sure all your equipment's dialed.
Absolutely. A question from Jorge. He says, "Hi, I'm a long-distance triathlete, and I've been using TrainerRoad for a couple of years with great results. You really have a great product and great podcast. 5 stars." Thanks, man. Good to hear it. He says, "On August 2018, I'll take part in an Ultraman." Oh, that's crazy stuff right there. Which is a kind of very long triathlon. It's a 3-stage event. Day 1 consists of a 10-kilometer swim.
What?
Yeah, followed by a 150-kilometer bike ride. Day 2 is a 275-kilometer bike ride. And day 3 is an 84.4-kilometer run. Dear me. Jorge, you are crazy. That sounds so rough. He says, "I'm a little nervous and confused trying to figure out how to plan my training for such an event. I've never done something like that before, and there isn't a ton of training plans to prepare for an Ultraman out there. My current approach is trying to base my preparation on your high-volume full-distance triathlon, maybe trying to extend the long rides, runs, and swims on the weekends to match extra long tests I will face in the Ultraman. I'd really love to hear some of your ideas on how to tackle this, the preparation for this huge challenge. Thanks in advance."
Yeah, I think you're already onto it, Jorge. That as far as the plans on offer here at TrainerRoad, that's going to be your best fit. And then if you're going to modify anything, modify your long, whatever, swim, bike, or run. It really is that simple. So you just need to cultivate basically a high level of base fitness. And I'm not sure what time frame you're working with. If you have 28 weeks, if you have more. If you have more, I would just focus more on base conditioning. Yeah. So just drag out that base phase even longer, because that's all this is going to be, is one big, long base level effort, whether you're swimming, running, or riding.
I think it's like Ultraman stuff it's fitness, but it's so much more mental.
And nutrition too, I feel like, has to play a pretty big role in something like this.
If you mess it up, especially over 2 days.
Well, and going back to that psychological aspect of it, that's why extend those long runs, rides, and swims when possible. Get a feel for what it's like to actually run 50K even. I mean, I'm not trying to prescribe actual distances, but see what it's like when you're out there after 4 hours of running.
Yeah, this is like totally foreign terrain. We usually say that, you don't have to, like, if you have a century coming up, you don't have to ride 100 miles.
You've got to have some exposure to long stuff if you're going to do something like this.
Yeah. Not a 10-mile run when you got an 84K run coming up.
Yeah, that's some next level stuff. I would think, like, and something that we learned with stage racing and back to back was nutrition. Learning, having a plan on what you're going to do with that nutrition, making sure that it's feasible within those race days, and then being able to stick to that plan and knowing that it's going to work for you would be huge. For single track 6, that was something that I noticed was pretty tough. I wasn't hungry. I didn't feel hungry enough, right? I wasn't eating enough, and I should have been eating more and more every day. And anyways, I feel like that's like I hear that with Ironman a lot of the time. They say, like, the hardest, swim, bike, run, eat, and eat's the toughest one. I've heard that before, and it seems like it's even more important with a multi-day format. So
I don't have a lot of experience with Ultraman, so this is me off the top of my head. But what I would do if I was in a situation, you obviously can't combine all these into training, right? You can't do distances. You're going to take too long to recover. Just the the logistics of it too would be very hard. But for a 10K swim, I would sign up for, like, we have a Lake Tahoe really long swim that's, you know, or one at Donner that's a little bit longer. I would do maybe a ultra marathon, a trail ultra marathon, a 30-miler, but not do it at race pace. Do it at what the pace is going to be for Ironman, right?
Yeah,
kind of back it off, and so it's kind of like training, but I get some kind of like logistical support for these long things because it's hard to carry all that stuff for you, or do an open water 3-mile swim and have it be safe is hard to do too.
Yeah, that's massive stuff, man. Jorge, good luck with that, and let us know how things turn out. That'll be interesting to hear. Jamie says, it seems like I lack muscle strength, and I feel like cardiovascular fitness is a relative strength for me. I'm currently following sweet spot base mid-volume and struggling to finish the higher TSS sessions. Do you have any ideas or suggestions? And one thing before we go into this, we've mentioned this plenty of times, but not all TSS is created equal. So he says higher TSS sessions. It isn't just like higher volume or something else like that. But sweet spot base does have like a lot of sustained work that requires that muscular endurance.
And that's the key right here. So he's talking about strength limitations. And was there some mention of getting into the gym? I thought there was.
Yeah, no, not in this one.
But anyway, it's not strength. If you're looking at strength training, sort of strength gains, I mean you'll recognize you're deficient in that sort of thing when you start to see particular things. For instance, the decline in your body's form on the bike. As less fit riders, less strong riders get tired over the course of a long ride, their posture starts to suffer, their pedaling style gets a little more wasteful, that sort of thing. Maybe you can't jump to catch a break, you don't have a sprint, you can't surge up a short hill. That would indicate that you have maybe a bit of a strength limitation that you would address differently than a strength endurance limitation, which I think is what you're describing here. So you're just talking about sweet spot intervals that maybe were 8 minutes or 10 minutes, and now they're 12 or 15, and you're having a hard time getting through those latter minutes. In that case, you've got a few things to look at. We've talked about how nutrition and hydration play a real important role in these steady state, sustained, high intensity efforts. I mean, high intensity relative to threshold. You're working at a high percentage of it, and you're staying there for a long time. So if you're underfueled for that, if you're running out of hydration, your heart's pumping harder and harder over the course of it, that can manifest. So make sure that's not an issue. Your TSS ramp rate. You said you're in a mid-level plan. Maybe that ramps a little too quickly for you to respond positively to it. Maybe you need a little more rest. This could mean shifting around your rest days. Could mean shifting around your rest week. Instead of every third week, instead of every fourth week, it's every third week. That sort of thing. Also account for what's going on off the bike. So outside stressors could be influencing your rides. It might not be relative to your fitness exactly. It might just be tied to what else is going on outside of what you're doing on the bicycle.
Which happens all the time, right?
Totally.
And I think that in the base phase, a lot of people are in a situation where they'll be like, oh, it's just base work. We're good. And you'll underestimate the fact that like you have to consider it. It's a demanding, it's a lot of work. And it's not just like it's something that you can pass off. And man, I know that a lot of the time too, I want to tell myself that aspect of my life isn't getting to me. It isn't affecting me.
It's all getting to you.
But it does. It all adds up. Yeah. So
Long-time listeners have heard me complain of tired legs about a bajillion times. And Chad's like, yes, so many times.
A few times.
My legs are feeling great. And the things that I think of, I've done a lot of sweet spot base lately, and right peak, I think that's like I feel so great if I can do right peak.
It's a workout.
3x30 sweet spot.
That's a big boy.
And I think you're like 88, 92, 90 or something like that, percentage of FTP.
You could like just start eating after that for the rest of the day, and you would still enter a deficit.
I think when I do it, it's like 1,800 calories.
That's a lot, man.
Right? Yeah. That's like people's daily intake.
Totally. That's like what I'm supposed to be for my daily intake. Yeah.
But I'm trying to like really get good at my notes, what I take and stuff. And if I have a bad nutrition day and then I do sweet spot, it's so hard. Yeah. Like the this is how I feel. Again, this is Matt Fitzgerald Endurance Diet. Just read that book. But I feel like if I'm eating the high carb stuff to make my workouts be easier, like feel easier.
You're fueling your workouts, but the benefit is in could be in tangible performance, of course, but perception is like a big thing you're trying to draw.
Yeah, it makes the RPE of the workout is so much lower. It's the same output, right?
Yep.
When I eat very well and eat lots of carbs throughout the day. And really long-time old listeners, I try to do like this carb trickle thing, and I try to do so many things.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've finally got it.
But Jamie's following a plan, so I can assume that he has done shorter intervals that are gravitating toward longer intervals. So I don't think it's a lack of muscular endurance. I honestly think in this case it's probably undernourishment.
Yeah, which is super common. Like these, we call these workouts burners a lot of the time because you're spending a lot of time at a relatively high intensity. Remember, sweet spot work is darn near threshold, right? So it's hard work.
Yeah.
I just notice it if like the night before my dinner is, let's say, a hamburger and something else that's not a lot of carbs, and then in the morning maybe I don't have a lot high of a carb breakfast, and then it's just so hard. Like I can still get through it, but I'm like, oh, this is so, I actually think first, someone messed with my power meter. I actually think of you two. You came in there and you're like messing with my brain and you're messing with my power meter.
Chad and I are nowhere near. You give us way too much credit on that. Yeah.
I just it makes a huge difference. That's what I'm trying to say.
There's recognizable signs though. I mean, you just feel flat, which could be fatigue, but oftentimes it's because you're undernourished. But when the dead giveaway is when you're 12 minutes into a 15-minute interval, and it's those last 3 minutes that you're just struggling to get through. And then the next interval is a little tougher than that previous one. These are strong indications that you simply don't have enough fuel on board.
Yeah, and when it is, like they're all kind of easy. Like at the end, and then at the end of a sweet spot workout, sometimes I'll kick up the last interval. I probably shouldn't, but I kick it up because on those are the days where everything's fueled right. I had some bananas too while I worked out.
Your strength endurance. You should be able to do that. You should.
Yeah.
That's how
By
it
the
works.
way,
For
those longer, so right peak, 2 hours at 1,800 calories, I'm eating during that ride.
Yeah.
And I love now a bunch of bananas.
You're not going to be able to preload for an 1,800 calorie workout. You're going to have to ingest something over the course of the workout.
But rather than more expensive, I love the chews that I have for like racing and stuff. I'm not going to carry a bunch of bananas on me while I race.
Right.
But having that while I work out, I can eat a lot of bananas, and I have a special talent to be able to eat a lot of food.
They can also eat whatever food in terms of like his stomach. It's an iron gut.
But just the idea that when you are training inside, you could use some dates, like dried dates, would be great while you're working out because a lot of sugar and stuff. It's less expensive than buying a whole bunch of packets because you can go through a lot of those.
Something I think so. This is a mistake I made, and perhaps other people are making this mistake as well. I used to think I don't need more food because I'm not hungry. And like you always hear that thing, like if you wait till you're hungry, you're it's too late, right? But I always thought that like that was my indication that I needed to eat more. However, after reading the endurance side, I realized the fact that like no, it's not about necessarily feeling hungry. It's about giving my body what it needs in terms of that energy. And yeah, it feels like in a lot of cases at first, especially, it felt like I was eating way too much.
Well, depending on the intensity of a race, it can be pretty hard to feel hungry. I mean, you're not going to feel hungry. It doesn't mean you don't need food.
And I'm always thinking about the next workout. So even if it's the last interval, a right peak, and I'm like, I got 15 minutes left. I'm like, I can totally get through this without eating anything. Yeah. But I'm not trying to change my body composition. I'm like, but tomorrow I am going to do Baxter, or maybe do some more sweet spot work. I'm like, I'm going to eat a couple more bananas and some more stuff, and then afterwards I'm going to eat some food, even though I could get through without it.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's working.
It's working, right?
Yeah. We'll do the last one from Kevin, and then for those that are with us on Facebook Live, we'll answer your questions thereafter. So stick around with us. But this one from Kevin, he says, I just finished a season of cyclocross. I'm still relatively new to racing and training with power, and I'm still learning a lot. This is my first season with a power meter, and I'm reviewing the data. I noticed that in most of my races, my power is significantly lower than in solo road efforts. For example, most of my races, I might average 175 average power with 210 normalized power for 45 minutes, with a best ever number of 205 average power and 235 normalized power for 45 minutes. On the road, I would regularly do 45-minute loops at around 245 average power, 285 normalized, that were difficult, but less so than cross racing for me. And then he says, is it normal to have 70% available recorded power in cyclocross events? I understand that the power meter isn't capturing off the bike power, but I picked races with little running for my power examples. He says, if this isn't normal, is there anything in particular I should do or I should work on, or is it a matter of simply getting fitter? Well, it is clear from quadrant analysis that these events are quite different from a road ride. It is unclear if it is the low cadence or the extremely short anaerobic bursts, or simply pacing and strategy at fault here. So, and then he mentions that he's working through the base plan right now, and it's great, and he thanks us. So good stuff. We all see this. In fact, Keegan Swenson, a pro cyclocross rider, even he sees this. He had some issues with with a power meter, the data that he was using at first that were throwing things a little off. But
yeah, he rocked my beliefs temporarily.
Yeah, so. Yeah. It's normal to see much lower numbers in cyclocross. You can't compare them to what you're going to get, especially like you said, a solo road effort. So I'm assuming that's pretty darn consistent. So you can carry a really high average, and you can even just get really close to riding right around threshold. With cyclocross, you simply don't see that. And it's not just because of the running time. You don't realize how off on that power is. You're constantly having to govern it. So I'm thinking about Cyclocross Nationals, the course that we had there. There were situations where it was going up a short little surge and then down that little surge, but it wasn't that steep. But the fact is the terrain that I was on made it so that I couldn't keep the power down all the way, right? There's so many little interruptions throughout the course that it just really drops. It tanks that average. So I personally don't even compare like the site. I don't like look at that and think, oh man, it was only 280 or 270 normalized power while 310 during a crit.
No, we've all seen our lowest numbers on cyclocross races.
Yep. Lower than mountain biking, lower than everything. Yeah.
And then mountain biking is less than road.
Yep.
And I say crits are usually higher than anything else, depending on the nature of the crit.
Yeah, because crits...
In terms of normalized power?
Normalized power,
yeah.
Yes.
While crits
power
are
level.
variable, they afford a lot of opportunity to stay on the gas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cyclocross racing, mountain bike, there's a lot of opportunity to not be on
but a requirement to not do it.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, you can't... Yeah, exactly.
But the cross race and the mountain bike race feels just as hard
Yes.
as the crit race, but the
yeah.
power numbers don't. And we know that.
Yep.
That's just the way it is.
That's just the way it is. Yeah. And so I feel like this is an example of where you just have to like have a separate grain of salt for your cross races, and you analyze them in their own
Relative to
vacuum.
cross races, really.
Exactly right. Separate from what you have with road stuff. So it's normal. Don't feel bad about it in this case, Kevin. Well, that covers it for the questions that were submitted this week. You can do so, remember everybody, at trainerroad.com/podcast. And once again, if you're with us on Facebook Live, stick with us and we'll answer the questions that you've submitted. But for all those that are just here on the podcast, thanks again. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You guys cool?
Yeah.
Steph asks,
we'll push them to you, Chad.
any ideas, tips on mental toughness and how to get tougher? Yes, go to youtube.com/TrainerRoad, and we did a whole podcast with Matt Fitzgerald, and then read the book, How Bad Do You Want It?
That book is fantastic.
Fantastic.
And I think that's probably the best way to sum it up, because otherwise I'll wax poetic about all that stuff and waste people's
Sports
time.
psychology.
Yeah.
Jeff asked, and I think we covered this, but we'll do it again. What, if any, alterations to the training plan should an athlete in their 50s make, or 60s? Any guidance?
Yeah, we deal with this quite a lot, to the point where we were going to devise master's plans specifically for this.
We got another idea for that.
We have
Chad.
a workaround, much better one. You'll see. But anyway, I touched on this earlier when I was theorizing what might be wrong with one of the question askers from earlier on, and it's basically a question of rearranging your recovery relative to how well you're recovering. With aging athletes, a couple days of intervals might set you back a lot farther than with a younger athlete. So maybe a Tuesday, Thursday scenario means resting not only Friday but also Saturday. I hate recommending, or I dislike recommending an alter or a floating schedule, because it's so difficult to work with.
Yeah.
But that's optimal. I mean, that would be the best way to do it. Even if it means, this week your hard workouts are Monday, Wednesday, next week they're Tuesday, Thursday, the week after that they're Wednesday, Friday. If it's constantly moving, it's difficult to schedule. A lot of masters or older athletes have the luxury of being able to accommodate schedules like that, though. Or not a lot, but some of them do. If you're one of them, that's my first recommendation. And then almost always, I like older riders to recover every third week rather than every fourth. It makes quite a difference, because that third week just runs you down to a point where it's really hard to rebound. But if you nip it in the bud, do it after just a couple weeks of hard training, it's a lot easier to keep things on track.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Sean says, you mentioned fueling up well before workouts. Do you ever do fasted endurance rides? if fasted riding is fasted riding useful for fat loss. We've talked a lot about fasted training. It's pretty easy to put yourself into kind of a hole. I will start like longer rides a lot of the time if they're early in the morning. I might start it fasted if it's of low consequence and lower intensity, but then always after an hour or so, I'm taking in food for the rest of the ride. So.
I think there's, this is what I do personally. I don't do any fasted rides because I'm always trying to think about the next rides, right? So I don't want to deplete myself, but I know if you do a fasted ride, you're going to burn more fat, but I'm thinking about, okay, how are these next 2 weeks going to go?
And here's my point too. I think that it's for many reasons we want to drop fat, not just because we think that like, oh, it's going to make us faster on the bike, but we want to look better. And it's just, it's good in our minds to lose that, you know?
Yeah.
I think that if you were instead to look at things on the perspective of, well, what makes me a faster cyclist? In a lot of cases, if you had a properly fueled workout and you were doing, within reason, a properly structured but more demanding workout, you could very well be doing more to make yourself a faster cyclist than doing a low intensity one where you're trying to shave a pound or two of fat, you know?
I'm still a proponent. I like fasted rides. I especially like them if you know you're going to go out and go easy for a long time. There's nothing wrong with it. You can go into it after an overnight fast even, so that you come into it almost entirely depleted. But if you keep the work intensity low, you're not setting yourself back. You're not depleting glycogen stores, which are already depleted. Restocking them later isn't a big problem. You do have to see it in the bigger scheme of things, and I don't like the idea of doing a lot of fasted training because I've experienced it myself. At some point, it comes at a great expense.
It does.
But they have their place, and they're beneficial in terms of aerobic adaptation.
I think a key thing is what energy, like what percentage FTP
are you doing? It has to be low intensity. Otherwise, it just has to be. Otherwise, you're missing the point of it.
Totally.
And you will set yourself back.
Yeah, and even if you're able to complete that workout, like you said, Nate, thinking of the next workout and down the road, it does start to dig a hole for you after that. And it's
if you do
tough
too
to
much.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you go too high.
Or you just push it too far. That's a possibility too.
Yeah. John asks, should I do lots of low cadence work to improve climbing? I am finding I have good fitness out on the road when I can spend 90 to 100 cadence. However, when I hit a climb and have to do 70-ish cadence due to the incline, I struggle. Not sure if months of indoor training, mostly spinning at 95 to 100. I wonder if I have lost out on strength when I have to grind it out. What do you think there? John, no, buy more gears. Like if you're hitting 70 on the climbs, you just don't have enough gears.
Yeah, now there are certain situations like we had, for example, at when we went to, whatchamacallit, Single Track 6. That one was in a really bad situation.
We're not live anymore. Let's pretend like we're live just in case.
Yeah, we just keep going. In Single Track 6.
Oh, we're live again.
There we are.
We're good.
Okay, cool.
The Single Track 6, for example, that one had absurdly steep climbs that were absurdly long.
Yeah, there was no gearing that was going to make that anything other than an uphill slog.
Yeah, we would have needed to have like 12-tooth chain rings.
Yeah, so it's not to say there isn't benefit to be derived from the slow cadence work. I don't think you need to make it a big focus. But if, in fact, you're going to have to employ it, definitely practice it. And, there are things to be gained knowing that you can muscle up a big climb if necessary. It's a lot easier to watch your form.
What you talked about earlier, like a road racer having a broad portfolio, so to speak, of skills.
Always expand your arsenal when possible.
And I think with cadence is the same. Yeah. I think that you should you don't have to do all of your training at 70 because you fear that on one climb you might drop down into that. But familiarize yourself with what you need to do and that type of training and at a wide array of cadences. I think it's smart.
Be able to do it, but it's based on where you live too.
Totally.
So if I lived where Single Track 6 was, where it was super steep like that, I would have had a smaller front ring. And
then you probably would have done more slower work too, I would assume. So.
Well, I think I just would have done it so I could climb those hills.
I genuinely think that we would have needed like a 12-tooth. It was so steep.
But I mean, that's it though. If the topography in your area or where you're going to race demands it, then certainly practice it.
Froome uses a 32. Yeah. Contador used a 32.
Yeah. Anytime you have the option of overspinning and you have access to the gears, we're unanimously on that.
Yeah.
I just got made fun of at a training camp for having a 32.
Yeah. Did you ride away from them on a climb?
I rode away from everyone on the climbs.
There we go.
They were on one climb. One guy had to go back and forth. It was so steep.
Boy.
Yeah. Yep. and I spun up past him at 90, and it just helps so much to have gearing.
There's a short video of me going up Mauna Kea that the Big Island bike tours. Look them up if you're in that area, by the way. They took a video of it, and it went viral on Instagram for a while, and it was mostly because people were just losing their minds that I was riding with such a small chain ring, and they said it's disgusting and terrible and everything else, and it's like, well,
yeah, put them up at 14,000 feet with a, I don't know, 18% grade underneath them on a gravel road.
I walked 5 feet of that road versus most people walk a ton of it.
Yeah, right. Like 30 minutes of walking.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to see them beat your time up Mauna Kea.
Yeah.
With a big chain ring.
Yeah.
Exactly. Go for it. So, yeah, gearing. And also, something I should clarify. I'm talking about cadence work and everything else. Like, the first problem you should solve is the gearing one. And I think that a lot of people have yet to solve that problem in the sense that they have gears that don't give them wide enough range.
Daryl asks, does gearing have an effect when doing ramp test X on a smart trainer? Will FTP be different when using the small chain ring and biggest cog versus the biggest chain ring and the smallest cog? So if you go to our Facebook beta group, we're experimenting with a new ramp test. Daryl, the only thing that's going to change your gearing is how much inertia you're going to feel while you're riding. So I like a bigger gear always because it's more like a road-like feel. But I wouldn't. That's like the real small stuff. So if whatever feels nice to you, just do that for the test and then do that for all your workouts too, and you're fine.
Your FTP is your FTP. Your ability to express that may change, but such a small change like that with gearing, it may not. It's probably not going to manifest itself.
I can feel it, and I like the bigger one, but I would just keep if you did it on like small gear, so it went slower, you could redo it because it's not that hard to redo it on a big gear and see if you score any differently.
Yeah, totally.
See if that inertia is a thing for you.
Yeah, but yeah, once again, your FTP is your FTP. Your ability to express it is what's changing. So, Erica says, I use a Wahoo Kicker to train with TrainerRoad. Is it worth it to buy a separate power meter for my bike to use outside? I think a power meter is always a worth it choice. It's a good idea because you can have it outside, have that data. I know that a lot of people say, well, the power just informs perception, and yes, or like data informs perception, yes, but the nature of power, and we did a whole video on power versus heart rate, and we extolled the virtues of a power meter and using power. I would recommend checking that out because I feel like there's a lot of benefits that you get in terms of training and how to train and how to understand your performance from a power meter.
Well, then there's race data, which is some of the most useful data you can acquire.
Totally.
So very often, and you're not going to get it unless you have a power meter on your bike.
Yep.
And if you do a lot of training outdoors. So if you supplement with a lot of outdoor rides, again, you want that data.
Mike asked, do you have any plans to have a development feedback page? It would be cool to have a place to make requests and have users vote on future features and enhancements. We used to have a page like that, and we took it down because there were literally like 500 requests in there, and we couldn't do a good job on responding to all of them. And so the new process now is email support, and they have there's enough support people in there, and that they get those ideas to product managers, and then we prioritize them. I'm sorry. Sometimes things take longer than people would like to. Android, we worked on that hard. We've got a great Android app now. But as we're working on it, we tell Android users, we're working on it. And they would they would get so mad at us.
Very angry.
I'm like, we're working on it.
I was worried we were going to get something in the mail.
I know, exactly. Joining the TrainerRoad beta testers page, you can give feedback on the new features that we're doing. But in general, we have a solid roadmap, and I know there's. I wish I could do everyone's feature request, but if we did everyone's feature request, we would have like this Swiss Army knife. When what we really need is a great knife,
a great cleaver, or
a specific type of that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, Mike, that your ideas would be like that, but basically, if you want us to hear them, email support, and they'll come through the right channels and get to the product manager so that they will then prioritize them if they're in our the mission to make people faster and kind of the other things that we think that will make people as fast as possible. That's kind of a vague way to say it, but
we try to be as disciplined as humanly possible with that, as far as on staying focused on that single thing of making people faster. So, let's see. Michael says, new TrainerRoad user, loving the improvements I'm seeing so far. Thanks for your product and awesome podcast. Sure. Thank you, Michael. He says, June is going to be a tough month of races for me. I have 2 state series races, Cat 2 on consecutive weekends, followed by the Lumberjack 100 on the 3rd weekend. I'm more concentrated on the shorter races, but want to finish Lumberjack in 9 hours or less. What sort of taper or training approach should I implement in that time frame? So my response would have nothing to do with 9 hours or less. I don't know where your fitness is and what demands that course would have on you, but this much I can say, and the reason I wanted to address this one is because a lot of people have multiple events that fall close to like a peak. And if you have 3 weeks of racing in a row, or 3 weekends of racing in a row, plan to peak for that first or second week, but plan to peak around that time. And then in between those, you don't need a whole lot to be able to maintain that fitness. Pay attention to your body. Look at those final workouts in that specialty.
Yeah, you can stay sharp for that entire 3 weeks. And even though the demands are pretty varied between the 2 short races and the 1 long race, as long as you're carrying a lot of fitness into it and not doing too much during the week in between those races, and we're talking like short taper workouts, 30, 45, maybe hour-long workouts, depending on your level of fitness. You're a Cat 2, so you can probably get away with hour-long workouts. But you should feel really good going into each of those weekends.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Jose asks, I've always heard that if you gain fitness quickly, you will lose fitness equally quickly. The sweet spot base plans seem pretty intense. Won't I peak too quickly?
No, I mean, it's all part of a progression. This is where it starts. So from there, we only progress upward. So
it only gets harder. Sorry to say.
Well, you get fitter. So it stays relatively hard, really. As your fitness increases, so do the demands we place on you via these workouts. And
Jose, like I think in a lot of cases, what people are referring to is an extreme that operates at different ends of a spectrum than what you're talking about here. They're talking a lot of the time that's applied when guys are they're doing extremely hard sprint training in January type of a thing versus a person doing base. That's kind of like the polarized examples that's usually used.
Those higher energy systems build quickly, which means they dissipate quickly. Yes. And it's hard to hold on to them for long periods of time. So I've used the term brittle fitness. If you build it quickly, it will dissipate quickly. That's not what's happening with the sweet spot base plans. We're taking a slower, more progressive approach. So it may seem like quick fitness because you're getting fit quicker, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the line. We're not gonna peak you after 6 weeks of sweet spot and call it good.
It isn't that high. Don't worry about it there.
Mark's asked, he basically says, could you guys be consistent about when we go live? And I think Thursday mornings.
Thursday mornings at 8 is when we're going to be consistent from here on out. We've been at 8:30. But now we're going to be at 8. So.
And the only other thing that will change is if one of us has a vacation.
Yeah, there will be changes.
Too sick.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll try to be as consistent as we can. Yeah,
we'd love to be, that just put life on hold every single time for just 8 o'clock. But we're as consistent as we can be. So.
This is the on our calendars. This is the reoccurring event.
Yes,
every
it's there.
Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific.
That's the planned time. Yeah.
So and there will be other situations, like for example, we'll have like a Saturday episode or something like that. But yeah, Thursday at 8. That's when you can expect us. 8 Pacific, I should say. Matt Fitzgerald is the one that wrote the book, but I think that you already got that, Andrew. That's the endurance diet book that we were talking about.
Ray's as a question. I'm just going to paraphrase. He said, should I look at my heart rate while I'm doing a sweet spot interval? Should I lower the intensity so my heart rate doesn't go too high? No, Ray.
Ray's poking the bear.
Ray's a troll.
Are you trolling us, Ray?
Ray, go to youtube.com/TrainerRoad, and there is a video we did about power versus, it's called how modern athletes train. Power
versus heart rate.
Yeah. Look at that. We talk about it for like 20 minutes in there.
When it comes to interval training, power is king. Power is king, period.
Someone says, welcome to the 46-year-old age army, Chad.
Oh, thank you.
He's not there yet.
Yeah, just about.
All right, we'll just do a couple more here. Let's see. A lot of people saying that the training is going well with Sweet Spot Base. Fantastic. A lot of people are in Sweet Spot Base right now, so makes sense. Awesome. Good to hear. I like hearing the commentary, seeing the commentary of like while we're going and people chiming in. And so many of you just say the things that we're going to say, just ahead of us. It's cool. I like it. Let's see.
Is this a wrap?
I don't know. I'm just reading through them. There's a lot of them this week, man. There's a lot of them. And I think Dead Air is fine with all that have submitted questions.
Okay. Our biggest question extra, Alex. Hello, guys. Which workout should I include in my base training to improve my 1 to 5 minute power? My power curve has a steep incline below 1 minute, but not very steep from 1 to 20 minutes. I understand that your 5 minute power is relatively close to your 20 minute power. There's not much room for your FTP. So I know Alex is on traditional base because he wants to lose weight.
Yeah.
Alex, I think you should just be doing sweet spot base. And then I think during base, you shouldn't worry about improving your 1 to 5 minute power at all.
At all.
Not especially if you're going the traditional route.
Yeah, traditional, there's like...
There will be no change.
No change at all, right? So there, just don't worry about it. Wait till you get to build and then specialty, and then it's already in those
And even
plans.
sweet spot. And sweet spot base, you get into sweet spot base 2, you'll see some VO2 max work that'll nudge that 3 to 5 minute power upward.
I see one that says, are pedal power meters reliable? We've seen good data from the P1s and the vectors. So there's that.
Jared backed me up here. He says, I've been on a low carb plan this week, and sweet spot base is brutal. Oof. I can do minus 15%, but I can do minus 15% all day. Yeah. Like turn it down 15%. Yeah. You are changing the nature of that workout.
Totally are.
Yeah.
I guess the last one that we'll end on, because this is going to be a teaser for something coming up. He says, what are your thoughts about using compression tights to help with recovery? We're actually in the midst of trying to find science behind a lot of these recovery efforts. So stay tuned. I don't know if it'll be in next week. I don't know if it'll be in 2 weeks. We'll see when it'll be, but we're looking into that very thing because we want to find science behind the claims that others have made and the benefits that we perhaps feel. We want to make sure there's actual science.
Compression tech's a bit wishy-washy.
It's tough too because
it's hard to find good science on it too.
And you have to research the research.
Yes, exactly right.
Because who did the research?
Yeah, yep. It's pretty common to see that. So, all
right. One more. Another question from Alex.
Cool.
What are the fitness performance % gains between short, mid, and high volume plans? Do you guys have stats on that? And we don't. It is so. You just can't. We can't say like, oh, you'll gain X amount of per fitness on this and X amount on this because it depends on where you're starting, your whole lifestyle, your genetics.
It's relative to your capacity for improvement. So if you have a big one and you can handle high training loads, then you probably need a high volume plan in order to bring you to a higher level. Whereas someone who's deconditioned or new to structured training or just has never trained very hard, there's more room for improvement. So they, as a percentage, could see just as big a gain as someone on a high volume plan.
To that, Edward says, I'm 54 in the midst of a high volume sweet spot base 2. Am I digging myself in a hole?
You tell us. Yeah, you tell us if you can sustain it. If you're dealing with those longer intervals and not falling apart. If one recovery week gets you back in the game when it's over. If your recovery days are allowing you to hit your next workout and be on target, then
totally.
When you
a 20-year-old might suffer worse with that than a 54-year-old.
Yeah, who knows?
In some circumstances.
It's a question of what you can tolerate.
Yeah, not just age. So, all right, everybody, thanks for joining us on the live stream, and we will see everybody next week at 8 a.m. on Thursday. We're looking forward to it. Chat soon.
See ya.
Bye-bye.